Beck and welcome to a second video celebrating International Women's Day. I've done a previous one about favourite female characters, and in this one I wanted to talk about some female authors that I really love. So the first one on my list is Sophie Gonzalez. She has written Only Mostly Devastated and has yet to publish her next book, Perfect on Paper, which I am very much looking forward to, and it sounds like a version of what I've loved in Sex Education, with a bisexual female protagonist who is taking on sex advice for the people at her school. And I loved that concept in Sex Education, a variation on that concept, so I'm really excited about Perfect on Paper. However, she's on this list because I loved Only Mostly Devastated. I gave it an unexpected 5 stars last year and it made my top books of 2020, and so that's why I'm anticipating her new release. But her first book, Only Mostly Devastated, was a retelling of the musical Grease, and she wrote it in a way that had such a beautiful male-male love interest in it, and it had such queer positivity and positive friendships rather than negative, toxic ones. Although there obviously was negativity in the books, otherwise there wouldn't be tension and therefore not a plot. It didn't stem from characters argy-bargy and from hating on each other. It very much stemmed from characters supporting each other and then having other circumstances cause tension to all of them. So I really respected her for that, and that's why she's first on my list. And she's also a contemporary author, which I don't read a ton of, so that's why I also wanted to include her. The next author on this list is likewise a contemporary author that I have a lot of respect for, and that is Juno Dawson. And I loved Clean, and I really enjoyed Meat Market by her. I read Wonderland and I didn't love it as much, but I'm also not an Alice in Wonderland retelling person, so I knew that I wouldn't love it as much as her previous two. Juno Dawson tends to write about trans characters because she is trans herself, and she also tends to write about serious things like mental health and drug use in her books. So if those are things that are upsetting to you, probably skip them. But to me, I found that very grounding and gritty about her work. Her writing is also very playful, and I honestly will pick up anything that she publishes because I love her writing style, and that's why I read Wonderland by her. I adore her writing, and I adore how her themes about society in general and mental health and drug use and sex positivity really come into her work. She is such an amazing author, and if you haven't read any of her work yet, I don't know what you're waiting for because she's so dang good. So if you could start with Clean, because that's my personal favorite. She's written way more than just those 3 books, so definitely go and Google her. She's amazing. Now I want to talk about V.E. Schwab, and I was hesitant about putting her on my list because in the past I've enjoyed her work, and only recently have I been obsessed with one of her books, and that is Addie LaRue, or The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And this is a book that is a standalone, and it follows Addie, who is in 1700s France, and she wants to just be free. She's a woman who is being forced into an arranged marriage, and she wants to be free from that and free to travel and free to live her own life. And so she goes to make a deal with the demons after dark. She prays to those demons or those gods by accident because she doesn't realize that it's suddenly switched over into being nighttime. So a demon answers her and grants her immortality, which allows her freedom. However, because she's got immortality, he twists it so that she also can't be remembered by anybody that she meets. And it's a book that I adored. I have a separate review for it that is completely spoiler free, and obviously it's a lot fresher in my head in that review than it is now, but I still adored that book. I still loved that book, and V.E. Schwab tends to write queer characters into her work as well because she is queer herself, so it is just nice to see a fantasy space with queer characters in it that they're not getting killed off in, because so many books have that token queer character that are just killed off, and we hate that bury your gays trope. We like it when there are actually characters who are being fulfilled and have proper story arcs to them, and that is what V.E. Schwab writes. So that is why she's on my list as well. Samantha Shannon is another one that I would like to add to this list, and I talked about some of her characters in my previous video, and she has written the Bone Season series, she's written the Priory of the Orange Tree, and I believe she's got more coming out in that world, but Priory on its own is a standalone fantasy. So if you're after a fantasy that, you know, it's quite long, but at least it's a standalone, not part of like a 10-book series, go with Priory. It's a 4-perspective book. One of the characters is a sorceress, another is wanting to become a dragon rider, and then there's a smattering of other characters in there as well. It's a very intriguing work, and it has lots of different women portrayed in it, which is what I adored. It's worth your time. Next is an author that I am consistently going to buy books for, and that is N.K. Jemisin, and she wrote the 5th season or the Broken Earth trilogy, and I gave each of the books in that series 5 stars. I loved the audiobooks. I loved the main character. Esun, I think was her name. There were a couple of different perspectives introduced, but I remember Esun specifically. I really enjoyed her and how she was stuck in this system and she was trying to do the right thing as she perceived it, but also not wanting to be part of this system. And I like the rebellion and I like her character growth. It was so good. There's also a mother in that series at the very start, and you see her as she has discovered the body of her child. And so it goes on from that point because the husband of her has murdered that child and then taken her older daughter. So you see it from, there's a character who is in motherhood and trying to protect her children that have been taken from her. And then there's also this character who is quite young and trying to fight for her own standing and doesn't really have her life yet. So I like that proportion you get in the narrative style, and I love how they're such individual characters with motivations and breadth to them. And N.K. Jemisin wrote The City We Became as well, which was a book that had such brilliant women in it also, such brilliant characters in general, and I love that attention to detail when it comes to characters and where they're from and how they would speak and how they would react to things, and it's all very believable. So I'm definitely going to continue buying books by this author, and I do have one that's sitting on my TBR that I do plan on reading, hopefully this year. You might be surprised to see this author on my list because I've only read one book by her, but I do plan on continuing. Actually, no, I've read a book by her and then that has been co-authored by her. This is Mary Robinette Kowal. I heard about her because I listened to the Writing Excuses podcast, and that is hosted by Brandon Sanderson, but it has an array of authors on it. And Mary Robinette Kowal is an audiobook narrator as one of her jobs. She's also obviously an author, and she wrote the Lady Astronaut series. I really enjoyed the Calculating Stars. I loved the female friendships in that. I loved the established relationship in that and the communication, and also the themes of racism in her work and of sexism and bigotry as well. She did those incredibly well, and it obviously made me very angry in certain parts, but it was designed to make me angry, and it's designed to make you appreciate things and notice things, and she did it in such a brilliant way that also incorporated anxiety and mental health as well, and that's why I want to continue reading her books. She narrates the audiobooks for that series, so I'm really enjoying the audiobooks, and that's probably how I'm going to continue reading them. After that, we have a favorite author that you probably have heard of if you've been on my channel for a while, and that is Robin Hobb. She wrote the entire Elderlings saga, which I think is like 14 to 16 books. I'm not sure of the exact number. Assassin's Apprentice is the first book. I have a review for it, which I will link if you are interested. I talk spoiler free and then spoilers in that video because I obviously had to rave about my love for Robin Hobb and her characters. But this is an author whose name is actually Megan Lindholm, and she's written in fantasy, kind of like V.E. Schwab, under a little bit of a pen name. Obviously hers is more significant because it's Robin Hobb, not Megan Lindholm, and V.E. Schwab is Victoria Schwab, so she's just shortened it there. But they've made their work palatable in a space that has not historically been a space that is rich with women in it. And I like that there's gradually that shift now because it has been long overdue. So that is why Robin Hobb is on this list. She really kickstarted my love of fantasy, and I remember reading all the Elderlings books a very long time ago, more than 10 years ago now, and I read them in tandem with my best friend and my dad, and we all adored them, and now I'm rereading them again. I've started this year. So they're very deep and they're very character rich, and if you want a fantasy that is not too long, because the first book is about 300 to 400 pages, just under 400, I think this would be quite palatable for you to at least start. So that is what I'm going to recommend to you. Please start Robin Hobb. Next up is Angela Slatter, and I don't talk about her nearly enough, but she wrote a book series that is the Verity Fassbinder series, I believe. They are an urban fantasy series set in Australia, in Brisbane, which is in Queensland, the upper state in Australia. And Verity is our protagonist. She is in her early 30s, and she's tackling thoughts of becoming a mother and motherhood, as well as being this kind of character that is like a contract cop almost. She is a contract detective, and she helps solve crimes and protect people who can't protect themselves. So in that sense, it's the trope that's very familiar to Dresden, the Dresden Files I mean, and that is the rogue with the heart of gold. I adore that trope, and I adore how motherhood was incorporated into it, and how while she was vulnerable, she never lost that fire to her. And she's actually part weird and she's part human. So weird in this world means that you have some kind of supernatural affinity, whether you're like fae or supernatural creature. Verity is part weird, so she has super strength. And I loved how that was incorporated. I love how she just muscled her way through things, but I also love how careful and vulnerable she was at the same time. So that is why it's on here, because I don't see anyone talk about this series, and I think it's a fairly underhyped Australian series that I ended up adoring. So if you can, please check it out. Now I only have 2 authors left, and another one is Amy Kaufman, and she co-wrote the Illuminae Files series, which I really enjoyed. And even though these are books that were carved out in the YA space, they managed to create characters, both Amy and Jay, they managed to create characters that felt a depth to them that I hadn't encountered in the past. The main character, I think, is Katie Grant in the Illuminae Files, and she is a character who you expect to have, you know, this amazing love interest and be the chosen one, but she's not. She is a character that just ended up on this ship because her planet got attacked and she's trying to escape, and this guy that she just broke up with is her only line of contact, and they have to figure out how to navigate around this virus that's breaking out on the ship and how to survive that and how to get back to each other. So I really loved that bit of subversion that happened. It made it more interesting, and it made Katie seem like she had more fire to her rather than just being a blank slate that you can put into any kind of dystopian book or fantasy book or sci-fi, for example. So I like it when writers definitely deviate from the norm, and I think that's what Amy Kaufman did. And in her later books, in the Ice Wolves series, which is her middle grade series, so a bit younger than YA, she's included characters that are mentoring but have their own fire as well, especially in Raina, who is the twin sister of the main character. And she gets her own space, even though Anders is technically our perspective character. And so I love how there's balance there. I love how with that cast of characters especially, Amy has written in different genders to capture the experiences of kids that would naturally read her books. So definite respect there. And then lastly, I couldn't make a list of female authors without including Angie Thomas, because she wrote The Hate U Give, and that has become an iconic and influential book when it talks about racism and police brutality. Star is an incredible main character, and she again is not the chosen one in any sense. She's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She witnesses the unjust murder of her friend, and she is justifiably horrified and upset and angry and wanting to do something about it. So it tackles racism as a whole, it tackles police brutality as a whole, but it also tackles Star's inner relationship with herself and her identity, and going to this school that she has a scholarship with that is predominantly a white school, and understanding and encountering all these microaggressions, especially from one of her friends. So it has a lot of social commentary in there, but in a very palatable way, and I believe this was made into a film as well. So Angie Thomas, incredible. She did a talk that I was lucky enough to attend in Australia several years ago now about young adult books and activism, and I did a blog post on that where I clocked a lot of her answers. So if you want to go and read that, please do, because I reread it recently and I re-experienced it in my head. Angie is amazing, and she's also so bubbly and hilarious and just adorable. So I didn't mean to make this video so serious by the end, but these are my favorite authors who are female authors and have written almost all female characters as well. So if you like this video, please come chat to me down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.